welcome to our next episode of Football Transfer Markets. And today we are going to cover Iceland. Our guest today is co-founder of Nordic Sports lawyer from Iceland, Sigurdur Kjartansson. And today he will provide us with some insights about Icelandic football regulations and overall depiction of Icelandic football. So let's start. Sigi, first of all, thank you for accepting and coming to this small event.
Likewise.
Long time no see.
Yes.
And let me shortly provide you with a brief explanation what we are doing here. So both of us know already that international football regulations are quite covered around the world. Like there are many programs. But if we look closely, there is not much information about domestic regulations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you brilliantly know that the domestic training compensation,
Mm-hmm.
transfer fees, and standard employment contract are out of scope of regulation by international football authorities.
Yes.
So we chose these three topics apart from the disciplinary and competition matters because this is another story, this is another realm to discover per se. So we decided to stick with these three topics and we cover country per country to understand the solutions that different countries applied for the regulation of their domestic market. So I'm happy to have you for covering Iceland.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start. Domestic training compensation system. How is it structured in Iceland? How is it functioning? What regulations we have at hand, and what are the fees? So provide just the general system.
So we have 5 articles in the Icelandic version of the RSTP. The Icelandic version is basically the FIFA RSTP with some modifications to Iceland. Domestically, until you have to pay, a team has to pay training compensation of 200,000 kroners if it's a contract for a pro, and 100,000 if it's an amateur contract. To put this into terms of euros, 200,000 is maybe about 1,300 euros, and this sum divides, as the FIFA regulations say, the percentage that the FIFA RSTP has, the 5% from 12, as you know.
You are speaking about solidarity contribution.
Yeah, the training compensation for Icelandic teams. So
the training compensation is being also divided like solidarity one by
Yes.
percentages.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's 200,000 for a pro contract and 100,000 if it's an amateur contract.
So you also have training compensation for amateur players.
Yeah.
On.
If they go to not if they go to lower leagues, of course. If they go up to better teams or make a professional contract, then yes.
But not in the opposite case. For example, if just one amateur player moves to a lower category, in this case you do not have training compensation.
Then it's then it's free. Then there's no. So it's we have most of the contracts in Iceland are amateur contracts. Every league except for the Premier Division can make amateurs contracts. So if you're in the first division, you can make an amateur contract to a football player, but the first division has to be a pro contract.
By saying amateur contract, you mean scholarship contract? I mean a contract that doesn't grant a professional status within the meaning of RSTP?
Exactly. They have some kind of defense on them, but it's not a full-on contract. They don't have the full-on jurisdiction of the RSTP. But because most of the players in Iceland are amateurs, so we have these two kinds of contracts. And I don't think I know that the latter contract, so the amateur contract, is much more used than the pro contract.
And is there any categorization of the clubs by the Football Association? How is it being done?
Not that I have seen. No, I was searching for it, but no, not. This is just this one sum, 200,000.
So this amount is like a unified amount for general functioning of the system.
Yes, so it's just one amount. Doesn't matter how much you go for. It's just this amount.
What's your opinion? Why the FA decided to take this position by not categorizing the clubs? Like, what do you think? Just your opinion. What is the meaning behind that? That it's very, very straightforward, as I understood. There
Yes,
is
it
no
is.
there is no differentiation between the clubs, like no any distinguishment. All the clubs are the same category, and
Yes.
the payment amount depends on the status of the player. So, what do you think? Why this method was undertaken? What's the reason behind?
So there's not much money going around in the Icelandic Premier League, or it hasn't. It's more now than it has. So I think this will change in the near future. But I think the categorization will be quite hard because it's so rapidly changing the Icelandic League. So there's not like one or two teams that are always the best, like in almost every league in the world. Yeah, I think it has much to do with the finances of the clubs. It will be hard for them to pay more than 200,000 kroners if they wanted to have a player. And I think 90 to 95% of every transfer in Iceland is a free transfer, not paid. It's very rare when teams pay for another player from another Icelandic club. They usually just let the contract come to its end and then sign them.
So you think that the reason behind is that financially speaking, the clubs perhaps will not be able to maintain
Yes,
this movement from the financial perspective.
exactly. I think there are maybe three or four teams that could do so. The rest, it will be difficult.
And speaking about finances, look, both of us know that the meaning behind the training compensation is not only maintenance of the solidarity within the industry and football community, but also this system is somewhat of a layer of protection for the investors
Mm-hmm.
and making creation of a healthy investment environment in football, especially in youth football, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you provide an investor with the tools to be compensated at the later stage for the contribution that was made in the youth football, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think? Isn't it like if the system you have right now is just kept for the maintenance of the current situation, current market situation, wouldn't it be much better to also include government for this to establish a, let's say, connected and unified system for better investment? And let's say the government could also participate in creation of a new environment, an investment environment, like reducing the taxation in football industry. Alongside, the FA can provide a better, not better, but a revised version of the training compensation system, and this will eventually have an impact of increasing the financial flow coming into the youth football in the country. What do you think?
Yes, that's a good idea. However, no Icelandic football club is owned by a specific individual or companies. It's all owned by basically the government or the towns that they're in. So Reykjavik owns like KR Reykjavik, Víkingur Reykjavik, etc. So there's no, it's you can't buy an Icelandic team. That's why the finances are so low in the Icelandic League. You can only support them with just donations. Big companies in Iceland have donated much to, like the fish industry donates very much to the teams that are outside the capital area, like small fishing towns. So they often have good football players from abroad because they get so much donated. But that, of course, must be taxed. So if we lower the tax on the football industry in Iceland, it would be better. But according to how the government works here, that's never going to happen. What was I going to say? I was going to also say with the finances. I would like to see a change in that. Just investors, companies, etc., could buy Icelandic teams. That would be much better because the
You told me that investors can't buy.
can't buy. No, they can only donate.
So this is a legal requirement or what?
Yes, it's just these teams are owned by the.
No, let me rephrase to be on the same line. For example, I'm a foreign investor and I want to come
Mhm.
and create a new football club from scratch. Like I establish legal entity, I apply for the FA for the licensing,
Hmm.
and so on and so on. Is it permitted or is it forbidden?
Yeah, that's the way you could do. You could make a new team. You can't buy a established team, but you could make a new team.
Yeah, so in other words, if there is a new investment plan developed in the country that can actually have some impact on inviting the investors to make an input to the football, right?
Yes, so you would have to make a new team just from scratch. And to play in Iceland, you have to follow the rules. You have to have youth systems. You have to have a playing ground. You have to.
Yeah, this is already coming from the UEFA club licensing
Yes.
regulations, which are mandatory within the framework of Iceland, because Iceland
Hmm.
is also a member of UEFA. So
Hmm.
this is pretty clear. Okay, and tell me.
Coming to your question with like the finances, of course, the FA in Iceland is very small. Not many, not many employees, and if we would have some kind of governance over this to review the regulations, review training compensation, of course, it will be better. I mean, I think it was 5 or 6 years ago there was a team in Iceland that like almost went bankrupt because they had to pay training compensation to a team in Brazil because they got some Brazilian player and they didn't even know they had to pay training compensation. The teams are so unaware of the regulations that FIFA sets and the FA sets, so they just get players from abroad and they just have to deal with the consequences. And likewise, now we are selling players abroad, and many teams just thrive on the training compensation they get from big teams in Europe.
Well, that's the meaning of creating the clearinghouse that we have now at the moment. So obviously, I suppose you also know that the clearinghouse is not operating as everybody expected so far,
Yes.
within the by the meaning of the time frame. I mean, but I suppose sooner or later it will be stabilized because, objectively speaking, maintaining all the football federations around the world with the limited human resources is obviously a huge burden to maintain. So, but the system, I think that sooner or later it will be stabilized. But yeah, about awareness, I fully understand what you mean. I'm completely in line with it. That's what we are doing right now,
Yeah,
right?
of course.
We
Yeah.
yeah, we arise awareness about the regulations, and this domestic coverage that I'm doing at the moment is actually aimed for these purposes, that many FAs maybe they will start to undergo some amendments in the current systems, and this is an information to consider because they can see how the things work in, for example, we have already covered Hungary, we have covered Cyprus, we have covered Egypt, so many countries, for example, to review. And about solidarity contribution, is there any solidarity system within the domestic movement or not? If you told me that there is no much, there are no many transfers going on against the payment, but if
No.
any, so no.
No, it's just it's the solidarity contributions just for transfers between countries. So that's of course not domestically, but domestically, it's the only thing I could find was that one sum you have to pay 200,000 or 100,000 depending.
Yeah, but what you say, yes, about the international one, this is Article 21 of RSTP. We notice that it is the international one, but in many countries, for example, for you,
Hmm.
Armenia as well. For example, we have a domestic solidarity system as well. So
Yeah.
if there is a domestic transfer against the payment, the solidarity must apply. I mean, this is it's a carbon copy of the FIFA's one, but
Yes.
it's also applied at the domestic level. In practice, I haven't seen so much happening, but it's there. So if one happens, it's there. So we have the regulation there, but in practice, I haven't seen it's utilized so much. Okay, so I suppose it's very straightforward.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's move to the second question,
Yes.
which is about transfer fees. If the transfer is being done against the payment domestically and when exporting the players. So, for example, so far as you know, what transfer structuring is popular in Iceland or is common within the sense of trade customs, like how the clubs usually regulate? Is a transfer fee, I mean, fixed transfer fee usually used, or there is a sell-on fee, or there are conditional fees? Like how the system, how the market operates from the custom trade perspective?
I think smaller teams, they put a clause on sell-on fee for players they sell to bigger teams in Iceland. If they sell them, most transfers are of course just the end of the contract and free. There are one-and-one players that are bought, and it's much more now common to have the sell-on fee, especially when they sell abroad. Then you always have the sell-on fee. But domestically, it's when these smaller clubs sell good players that are 16, 17, 18 years old to maybe a little better teams in the Premier Division. They put now sell-on fees in the contracts, in the transfer agreements with those teams, because they think they will be sold abroad in 1 or 2 years.
Yeah, so basically it's somewhat of a tool of safeguarding their hope
Yes.
for future. Yeah, now within these years, I also noticed that sell-on fee is becoming somewhat of a must already.
Yes, especially for a small environment
clubs.
like Iceland, it's a huge plus.
And so far, just for comparison,
Mm-hmm.
in my practice, I have never encountered, I mean, legally speaking, I have
Mhm.
never encountered so-called cross exchange of players. You know what I mean? That two clubs agree legally that they exchange the registration rights between the clubs for specific players. Yeah, excuse
That
me.
actually happened this summer in Iceland. Two teams in the capital area, FH and KR, they exchanged players. Two players went to FH and two players went to KR.
Yeah, I'm speaking legally. I also had one, practically speaking, back in the days, and
Mm-hmm.
when I told, like, guys, this must be formalized legally. Like, we must draft a transfer agreement. The two clubs agree to exchange the registration rights for
Mm-hmm.
this player, for that player, and then comply with all the requirements arising thereof. But they told me, like, no, we have a gentleman agreement, so that's fine. Like, they will just mutually terminate and they will just sign here. I said, okay, no problem. Like, you decide your will, your.
So you're talking about not a transfer agreement for exchanging players, but to mutually terminate the contract of the two players and then switch.
Yes,
Yes.
but this is not a cross exchange from the legal perspective.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
essentially it is, but legally no. Okay, and what about buyout clauses and release clauses or liquidated damages? How are they being used in the market, or?
No, not in Icelandic contracts. I have in front of me the standard KSE contract. That's just the standard contract of the FA. It's in it's divided into 5 main chapters usually, and it's not that detailed. So no, and I don't think clubs think so much further ahead that they put these clauses in the contracts. I have not seen it yet though. It could be some players, but I haven't seen it.
So, as you have already mentioned, I suppose it's time for the smooth transition to third topic about
Mm-hmm.
standard contract form.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to ask you two questions
Okay.
simultaneously. The
Okay.
first question, the contract that you mentioned that you are looking at, is it mandatory for football clubs or not? This is the first question. Or is it just a recommended form? And the second question is, this standard contract that you have in front of you, is it a result of the CBA, or is just an FA that just drafted it for the clubs? What is the history behind? What is it?
It's something the FA drew up, and it is mandatory for players in the first division to have this contract. You can add to the contract. They have this separate chapter which is called miscellaneous, where you can just add clauses. But the 3 provisions: players' duties, clubs' duties, and general provisions must always be in the contract. And
Yeah, but what about the wording? For example, if the clubs and a player do not agree with the wording provided in this contract and they want to change the exact wording in the rights and obligations, this is the interesting point. Is it
This is
mandatory or
so I've never seen a contract that has been amended or differentiated from the CAUSI standard contracts. I think if both club and player agree on certain terms to change them, then you could do that, because I don't find anything here that says otherwise. This is just the standard contracts you have to which you have to sign is of course made from the FA, because clubs in Iceland don't have lawyers, don't have any consultation, don't have money for that. So this is something that the FA provides them with, so they don't have to do it themselves.
you know why I'm asking this? Because I've noticed already that in the countries where the standard contract form was a result of a collective bargaining agreement between the players' union, clubs, and the FA, in these countries, usually the contract is binding and mandatory to the extent that, like, changing the wording is not permitted. But
Okay.
in the countries where the contract is being just recommended, or as you told, like it is mandatory, but there is some leverage to bargain about for changing the wording. In these countries, there is a room left for this kind of amendments to be taken care about. And also, I recall that your specificity was competition law, and I would like to know your opinion in this topic. If, for example, this kind of contract is not a result of the CBA and is just a contract drafted by FA, but it's enforced onto the parties, do you think is this an abuse of a dominant position or not?
Of course it is. If you can't amend and you have to sign it, and there's no alternative, there's just the FA, and you must do like they say. That's an abuse of that's an abuse of dominance. Yes, I would say so. And if you look at from a legal standpoint of view, because there's no other FA or there's no competition.
And finally, there is no any ground justifying the contract per se, right? That's the meaning
Yes.
behind the CBA, because CBA is the will that all the clubs decided to reflect, and the same for the players from the players union perspective, and the FA maintaining the agreement between the parties. But here, if the FA just comes and says, this is the employment contract that you must comply for your own affairs, for your own economic activity, etc., this is somewhat of a I also agree this is a clear abuse of dominant position. But surprisingly, there are some jurisdictions where this happens actually. We will cover later.
Here I found this for you. This is interesting. So the standard contract from KSC, from the FA of Iceland, it should have the three provisions I mentioned to you: players' duties, clubs' duties, and general provisions. And you can't amend that, but you can add things to it.
Okay, so here you answered the question: is it an abuse or not?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah.
yeah, but you know why I'm asking this? Because we know, right? For instance, just take into consideration that you are a club lawyer and I'm an agent of the player, or I'm a lawyer of the player, and I come to you and you say, this is the standard form of the contract of our league or our FA, and the player must sign this. Obviously, I will say, if I do not agree with it and the player does not agree with it, I would say that no, we are not going to sign it and we are going to change it, because the Article 18 of Swiss Code of Obligations say that the true and the common intention of the parties must be reflected. And you know that if there is a dispute, we are going to apply to FIFA, and FIFA will apply Swiss law, correct?
Of course.
So that's why I'm wondering how the things will operate in practice if
So this is interesting, because you're basically saying if a player comes here and he doesn't want to sign this contract, he wants to amend it, and the club says no, you can't. So we go to FIFA and to Swiss court, and the Swiss court obviously sees this as a violation, because they can't get through together. They will determine that this provision in the Icelandic FA regulations is a violation.
I would also add something. I see that in this kind of cases there is, from the CAS jurisprudence perspective, there is also limited bargaining power for the parties,
Mm-hmm.
which FA, in this case that you said, is coming from this regulation that you have at hand, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But another question which comes to this part is that, look, you said about applying to FIFA. This brings the next question. Do
Mm-hmm.
you have NDRC?
In specific tribunal in the FA of
Yeah,
Iceland.
yeah.
Yes, we have.
But so far, do you know, is it competent to hear international disputes as well? Because now FIFA, from the last winter, FIFA adopted new standards for NDRCs, where the new, yeah, you know that the new NDRCs must apply to FIFA for the acceptance, for granting the acceptance to review the international disputes at the domestic level. Do you know any news about that? Is the Icelandic one approved, or they didn't apply for that?
I have not heard about that, no. For my personal review, the Icelandic, I don't think they are competent even to deal with domestically cases, because I've read many of their cases, and yeah, they are quite hard to read, some of them. As you know, there are not many sports lawyers in Iceland, and regular lawyers just apply the law, don't look at sports specificity, don't look at CAS cases, just look at what the law says and apply that. I think there's a lack of sports law knowledge in the Tribunal of Iceland. And of course, Iceland is very small, so the panel almost certainly knows someone who's someone's cousins or someone's sister who is a party of that claim for the FA. So I think that's also not good enough, because I mean,
So you also raise,
really just one phone call away from the prime minister, basically.
so you want to say about the criterion of impartiality.
Yes.
Yeah, that's maybe an issue, but another thing, you said this NDRC is functioning according to the statutes or charter of the federation, right?
Yes.
So I suppose the decision of the NDRC can be challenged to CAS, or is it referred to a domestic court where it can be challenged?
So you can challenge it to a higher tribunal in the Icelandic FA.
Appeal committee.
Yes, appeal committee, and we have provisions about that. Yeah, so you can appeal to the tribunal and then to the appeal committee inside of Iceland.
And what about the final instance, to where the decisions of the appeal committee are being submitted? Do you know, or
CAS.
CAS?
You could, yes, you could.
So you just answered the most important question here. If it's going to be submitted to CAS,
Mhm.
basically we know that CAS legally, that the case law at CAS is not legally binding, but in practice CAS maintains its own jurisprudence accumulated for years. And basically you answered my next question, which was about the application of domestic law in the sports disputes, because if you are going to appeal these decisions to CAS, both of us understand, right, that CAS will not, let's say, when putting on scale your domestic law and CAS jurisprudence, I highly doubt that CAS will follow your domestic law.
Yes.
So that's the reason that CAS jurisprudence must be respected at the local level to have everything correct and on place from the very beginning. Don't you think so?
We have, so I'm looking now at the appeal committee's regulations, and you cannot appeal to regular courts for the appeals. You cannot appeal them to regular courts because it's final and binding, but you can appeal them to the Olympic Committee's appeal court. And in the Olympic Committee regulations, they say you can then appeal to CAS. So it's not that the Icelandic FA says you can go to CAS, but to the Court of Arbitration of Sports, but you can go through the Icelandic Olympic Committee and then through CAS.
Well, it changes the things on the formal perspective, but from the substance, but substantially is the same. The
Yeah.
CAS jurisprudence must be maintained
Yes.
in
Yes.
order to have everything correct and at place. So I suppose we also covered the third topic, and now the fourth question is up to your choice. What you would like to discuss with me about your domestic jurisdiction?
Well, yeah. I think we need in Icelandic just sports, not just football. In everything, we need more professionals here. We need more education on contracts, and I think I think that will be a good idea to start because everywhere I look and everywhere I go, there's always a mess in all the teams. It's certainly looks more like amateurism than professionalism from the Icelandic top clubs. I mean, for a starters, Víkingur Reykjavik plays now in the European Conference League, and they almost lost their home games because they can't play at home because their stadium doesn't
Comply with the UEFA category
yeah,
criteria.
and they have had all the time in the world to make that happen, to make the pitch better. They had all last year and the year before, but nothing has been done. And yeah, so I think we need more professionalism in Icelandic sports.
Well, just a drop of information on the matter that you covered.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, UEFA is very supportive when time comes with collaboration with FA in order to in the matter of compliance and development of the infrastructure, because not only the UEFA infrastructure regulation is public, not to mention that there are countless guidelines, okay, from UEFA about flood lighting systems, about pitch quality. Like there is a ton of information on that, but also UEFA, if I'm not mistaken, has a program called Head Trick, which is aimed to support associations which are developing their infrastructures.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that there is any issue for the Icelandic FA in future, of course, not in 1 2 days, but in future, I don't think that there will be a big problem to contact UEFA and to express the wish to make everything better at place. And I think it is time consuming, resource consuming, but it's not a
Yeah,
problem.
I
Yeah,
mean, we're first now. The national stadium has always had grass on the pitch.
you mean, excuse me, you mean natural turf?
Yeah, the national turf, the Icelandic national
Mhm,
team has always had grass turf, and
mhm.
UEFA has been saying we need to make that better for years, and it's first now happening that we are getting this hybrid turf with heating under it because we didn't even have heating under, and you can imagine playing in Iceland in November. I mean, they almost took the games away from us, UEFA.
But does it have drainage system underneath or not for water?
I don't know. It's a stadium since 1950 something, so I don't think so.
Yeah, so why I asked about drainage, because if you are going to install drainage, definitely this is not like a small reconstruction of the stadium. It's much more work than just a simple renovation.
Yeah, we're now setting heating and hybrid grass so we can play all year round at the national stadium. And the Icelandic team that got into the European Conference League, they are playing their home games at another stadium from another team in Iceland. So yeah, it's all over the place here. So
Yeah,
I
by the
think
way,
we need more professionalism in sports here.
Speaking about the club that you were mentioning that they are participating in the UEFA at the moment, for this kind of cases, UEFA also has so-called natural venue. You know, you can apply for UEFA
Yeah.
to organize the match at the natural venue. Of course, this is a bad thing from reputation-wise,
Mm-hmm.
but there is a solution in this case. And what about other matters? About you covered the professionalism, etc. And what about other matters related to movement of the players? I mean, does the market per se itself increase in terms of bringing importing foreign players, or like if you put on scale the importing and exporting, which one is more common now in the market?
This is a difficult one because teams in the lower leagues import players in high quantity from Eastern Europe, from Spain, etc. They provide them with work and they can play. So they're not professionals, but they get them to come to Iceland to play football. The export is of course huge. Also, we have, I don't know, 200 or something players outside of Iceland. But the main concept of teams in Iceland, you can see that there are 2 or 3 teams that just work to make players good and sell them. So I would say the export of players is bigger because we're always thinking to make the players better, to sell them abroad, to get the money in and have a sell-on clause.
But this is being done, as you told, by 2, 3 big clubs.
Yeah, so usually the big clubs take those small players when maybe they're 14, 15, 16. They offer them to come to their facilities and play for them, and then they sell them abroad. But there's maybe 2 teams that are very big in just selling their own homegrown players abroad
And
because they have good facilities. The youth system in Iceland, that's actually quite good. It's very good, actually. It's on par, I think, almost top of Europe. The facilities here are great for youth football systems. And
and
yeah, I think the exporting is bigger than the importing.
you just answered another in advance. You just answered to another 2 questions. The first one is why you have domestic training compensation for amateur players. That's the reason, because if you have 2, 3 big clubs doing this, other clubs must have some kind of a contribution. And I suppose that this question was raised internally by other clubs,
Yeah.
which were losing the players.
Mhm.
So this is the reason of that. And the second one, I suppose, about the training facilities that you just described, I suppose this is the reason that your country demonstrated the fascinating results in the previous championship, if you recall.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
The youth system is very good. The coaches, so we don't lack professionalism in coaching or in the youth system. It's very good. It's just about the legal aspects of things. Like youth coaches must have UEFA C or B degrees to coach here. It's not just some dad that is a volunteer. These are actual coaches that get paid, that train maybe 9, 10, 11 years old kids, all with UEFA degrees. So training is very good here.
But this is also a mandatory thing. Actually, it's coming from UEFA's coaching convention, and
Oh,
the
I did not know that. Yeah,
FAs must actually comply with it. It's a must. It's a mandatory
but we have had
document.
this for a long time.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's not a new thing actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anything else about the domestic jurisdiction?
No, I think I think it's all covered pretty much. So yeah, we should keep on doing what we do with the youth systems in Iceland and maybe step the game up a bit in the illegal aspect of things and how clubs and teams are run. And then we would be, I think, very good in the near future.
Well, legal things always come from corporationalization of things. So if I suppose if the Icelandic clubs will take the route of the commercial football,
Which I hope we
then
do.
yeah, then I also hope so, because there is a big argument always going on about the commercial part of the sports industry, that many fans, they say that this commercial spirit that comes into the sports, it destroys it. But
Mhm.
we must not forget that the commercial aspect is, at the end of the day, coming back to youth football. So it's like a circle. It's like a circle. If you exercise economic activity in sports, you create a possibility to make it better. So far, I think that the commercial aspect in sports is the future of sports, and especially in small countries,
Yeah,
in terms of population.
I
Yeah.
agree.
So what about medical aspect between the club and player? Is there any mandatory medical insurance?
Yes,
How is it being
that's
done?
actually good. Yes, there's a mandatory medical insurance that the club must provide the player with the necessary equipment or pay for a physiotherapist or yeah, have the physiotherapist on site. So yeah, we have the mandatory medical in the
But
standard
but
provisions of the
the,
contract.
does it come from the domestic legislation, or FA's? It's an FA requirement.
It's an FA requirement. It's under
Interesting.
club's duties. I
Interesting.
can read the act for you. It's the club shall provide insurance for the player covering accidents and injuries during practices, competitions, trips, and work in connection with the club, and KWSI, which is DFA, that ensures the player accident per diem, disability compensation, and perhaps death benefits according to the following. And then
So right away when when you were just reading this article, I
Mhm.
must again come to the part where I was speaking about the wording. So
Yeah,
right now I do not agree with this wording if I represent the player, because
okay.
or even if the club, because I do not understand if this wording includes training facilities in its entirety or on the pitch. For example, imagine a scenario when the training is over, the player goes out from the training pitch, but yet still the player is in the club's facility, like in the corridor or whatever, and then he breaks a leg accidentally. So it's not,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's not done during the training from the substantial perspective, but the player was still at his workplace, and therefore he was under the working hours. So is this a matter to be covered or not?
So that's that's a good question. We have
Yes,
this.
and that's the thing about the wording. That's why I do not agree with the
We have actually
imposition.
we have a little segment below this provision which says main clauses of insurance policy, and there you can add the clauses. So you could add this to the clause, which you're saying.
Okay, okay. So I think listen, and final question about Norway, Denmark, Sweden. Between these countries, is there, and your country obviously because we are covering Iceland, is
Mhm.
there any difference from the players' movement perspective? Like, is it noticeable that the players are coming from these countries in comparison with other EU countries or other countries in general, or like are they dominant in the market from the perspective of exporting the players to Iceland or not?
No, not from the northern countries. I would say Eastern Europe is the dominator here in Iceland. Especially like 10 years ago, we had many players from Serbia, Croatia, and yeah, those countries, the Balkan countries. Players from Iceland, they go to Norway or Denmark much more than Sweden, I would say. Maybe Denmark first place, Norway second place. But no, they actually come all around. And now from we get players from Spain, from Eastern Europe.
From
We
Portugal, maybe.
not Portugal. We have maybe one from Portugal, I think. But Spain, we have plenty players from Spain, especially in lower leagues. Many players from Spain. But I would say Eastern Europe would maybe be the biggest.
Dominator in
Yeah,
sense of
yeah, I would say so.
exporting.
In Iceland, yeah. And Polish players, there are many Polish players in the lower divisions, especially.
And do you have any Supreme Court decisions on sports in your country or not?
No, not that I can think of. I would have to look for it, but no, not off the top of my mind. I would probably have it on the top of my mind if there were. We have had a case about boxing,
Hmm.
where, if I remember correctly, they made boxing illegal.
What?
Yes, boxing. So boxing was illegal here without head equipment. Olympic boxing is legal, but
Well,
regular boxing illegal.
there is a European Council convention,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm not mistaken, about the guideline. Not I don't recall it by heart, but the essential part of it was about the it was called cage fighting, about the
Yeah.
guideline for cage fighting, the violence in sports, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But generally speaking, for some extent, it could also be applied for boxing because it was convention speaking generally for the sports types which have overtly violent exercising in it. So I do not like. I have some kind of a confusion in this why it was found illegal without the helmets of
Mm-hmm.
protection being exercised in Iceland. But this is already a matter for me to double check. I will
Mm-hmm.
definitely double check it. And if it's not the
I think it's not illegal anymore. It was, but I don't remember it. This case was a long time ago.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I think everything is covered.
Okay.
And do you have anything else to say? Any questions left?
This was fun, and I want to thank you for bringing me on.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for coming to the invitation. And yeah, it's fun actually. And it's very interesting from the professional perspective to have these comparisons.
Yes.
And as I told you, this is quite useful. For example, just so you know, in Hungary, I was really surprised what kind of training compensation they have there. It
Okay.
was really, really interesting. They have, let's say, three-layered system of training compensation. The one that even they have even one going up to 34 years old.
Really?
Yes, you see, so
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I'm speaking about. But there is a logic behind it because they also had many cases where the transfers were being done without payment.
Yeah.
So this is a somewhat of a tool to safeguard the contribution for the club where the player was participating at the end of the day, you know?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so that's why it's very interesting. And I
I
mean,
should bring this up to the FA of Iceland, maybe.
yeah, why not? You can
Yeah.
check. There are many systems which indeed genuinely differ from one to another, and these solutions that I find here or there is quite fascinating. So
Hmm?
yeah, that's the meaning of it. That's the meaning of it, and I try to bring and I try to cover as much jurisdictions as I can. So
Mhm.
let's see how it goes. Let's see how it goes.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's it. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.